Who do you say is the strongest killer in Dead by Daylight? Well, let's find out. Through a series of community tab polls, I asked you, my audience, to tier list each of the characters based on how strong you think they are in the game. So this is your community tier list. All right, now first up we have Trapper. Now you all voted D tier for Trapper, 46%, with 38% C tier pretty close behind. Now this is one of the few times that I'm actually going to disagree with the community. I don't feel he's D tier. He's at least C tier. Maybe in the right hands he could be B tier, but to be fair, in the right hands any killer could probably go up a rank. Generally speaking though, I think he is a C tier killer. He does take some strategy to use, and he might have a higher learning curve than some of the starting killers, perhaps, because you have to actually kind of know how to pace and set up traps and use the start of the trial to strategize where to place them and all that. And so it takes some more thinking ahead than some of the other starting characters. But set up correctly, I think he has the chance to actually snowball survivors, and that bumps him up, in my opinion, from D tier. I think he's potentially stronger than D tier, but that's just my personal opinion. That said, having the right or wrong map can really make or break him. For instance, getting Eyrie of Crows as Trapper is absolutely brutal.
Ah, for crying out loud. Well, I'm glad I brought along my inconspicuous bear traps.
I mean, it's just, forget it. Depending on the map, he really can go up or down it. I would say on Eyrie of Crows, he's a D tier. I think in general, he's at least C tier. But, this is your tier list, so we're going to put him in D, where y'all placed him. So next up is Wraith, and y'all put him in B tier. And I would agree wholeheartedly. I think he is a solid B. He's pretty straightforward, not super hard to learn right off the bat. He's beginner friendly, and I like his extra speed when you're cloaked. So that's kind of nice, but it's balanced because, yeah, he's not OP by any means. He's not overly strong. He's just a solid B tier killer. So I'm going to agree with the community on this one. And but either way, there he is, B. There you go. All right, next up is Hillbilly, and you all put him in B tier as well, and I agree, again. That said, I think that he's got a higher skill ceiling than somebody like a Wraith or a Trapper, so somebody can get potentially really good with him, and he's a little harder to learn right off the bat, but I think he's B tier. I think he's solid. And so, here we go, B tier for y'all. Next up, we have Nurse, and overwhelmingly, 91% S tier, and I agree absolutely with this one. A good nurse is very punishing. A decent nurse is still incredibly overwhelming. Breaks all the rules, right? All the rules of the game. She just ignores them all. She is definitely S tier. And one of the reasons why I would agree with y'all is because I don't think I'm very good with nurse, and yet I'm good with nurse, if that makes sense. She's a strong killer in that even though I'm bad with her, I still do well with her because she's that strong, I think. So all that to say, nurse, I agree with you all. S tier for sure. So, Nurse, S tier. Our first S tier. We've got a nice pattern going here, y'all. All right, next up we have Myers, or The Shape, and y'all put him in D tier at 54%, with, a healthy C tier in there as well. Now, I agree on the whole. I think he's probably the weakest killer in the game, if he's not the weakest, he's definitely one of the weakest, and so I would put him in D. That said, when you can get his special ability to just synergize with especially some of his perks, it can be really fun, but it takes a lot of things lining up and you doing a lot of the right things to make that happen. And if you don't, then he's on the weaker end. And so I agree with the community on this one. I think overall he is a D tier. And so we'll put him down there with Trapper, keeping him company. All right, so the Hag. Y'all put her in A tier with a pretty hearty 63%. That being said, this is actually another one. I know, like for the most part, I'm gonna agree with the community, and I know I'm front loading with a few disagreements here, but this is where I would kind of disagree. I don't think she's A tier. I think she's B tier. I don't think she's as strong as some people feel that she is. Granted, Basement Hag is way OP. More OP than a Basement Bubba. I will 100% admit that, and that is how I would play Hag early on, because it was too easy. It was too easy, and I'm sorry to all the survivors out there that I did that too, because it is silly OP. That said, I do think she has a lot of strong perks, well, but they can all be cleansed, and this is what I'll say. When a team knows how to counter her, she's really weak. You might be able to say that about a lot of them, but she's just, when a team knows how to counter her, I feel she gets definitely knocked down a tier. And that's where I would say, like, I don't feel she's strong enough to be an A, especially with some of the ones that I know we're going to put in A together, that y'all are going to put in A, and I'm going to agree with in a lot of ways. I don't feel she stands with them. So this is one where I will disagree with the community. However, this is not my tier list. This is your tier list. So with that, we will put Hag up in A. There you go. Real quick, if you're enjoying the video, can you let me know by hitting that like button for me? Also, would you consider subscribing if you haven't already done so? We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and it would really help us out. Thanks. Cheers. So now we're on to Doctor with a hearty 63% in B tier, and I would agree with this flat out. I think he's very well rounded. He's got, you know, he can shut down loops, he can gather intel, he's got some good stuff going for him. So yeah, I think y'all got it spot on with placing him in B tier. And so there you go, B tier. All right, now one of my favorites in the game, Huntress. And y'all put her in A tier with a hearty 79%. And I would agree 100%. I would say she's in the top end of A tier, in my opinion. As a ranged attacker, she's going to be strong. She's very strong with aura reading builds. And you know, she's got those pretty generous hitboxes, which if you played Huntress, you're grateful for, but every once in a while, I feel really bad because there's some where I'm like, that should not have hit. I think her low hatchet inventory will actually keep her somewhat balanced because you can't just be throwing projectiles all the time like, you know, some others in the game, you know, excuse Trickster. I'm sorry, what? So yeah, I think her low inventory of hatchets keeps her fairly well balanced and keeps her in the A tier. I went to the wrong screen. I went over to OBS to try to move her. That's hilarious. Oh gosh, I'm so tired. Okay, so I agree with you 100%. She's A tier. All right, and now we reach everybody's favorite buddy to go camping with, Bubba. Solid B tier, 72%. Yes, I agree with B tier. I think he's got the insta down, but it's balanced with the whole, you have to be kind of, you know, you can't just blindly go about. You run into just even the littlest thing and you're going to be in tantrum for several seconds. So all that to say, I think he's well balanced even with the insta down. Where he gets very OP is camping, obviously. There's very, very, very little you can do against a Bubba who's decided all out he's going to camp the hook. Even though he's OP in camping, he's not an OP killer because to me, camping's not OP because you can punish it so easily if you know what you're doing. So that being said, I think he's a solid B tier. I agree with you all. And let's put him in B tier together. Yeah. All right, next up we have Freddy or the Nightmare and 59% C tier. And I would agree with this. I think he's okay. He's not great. He's not anything fancy. I hear that he used to be pretty OP back before I played the game, and I really wish I had played back then so that I could have experienced great Freddy. But to me, you know, he's got a lot to his kit. He should be stronger than he is. I don't know. I just don't find him that strong to go against or to play myself. So I'm with you. I think he's C tier. So there we go. C tier, our first C tier, actually. All right, and then we have Pig. She is one that actually saw quite the split. You know, we got 49% C tier, but we've also got 37% D tier. Now, I understand the discrepancy a little bit. However, I don't think she's D personally. I think she's C, definitely C, in my opinion. She's very situational. If you can pull off stealth, she can be strong, but that takes time to pull off. And this is not a game built for taking time. It's a game built for seconds count. So that makes her automatically weak. But I also don't think she's D tier. Granted, her head traps I feel are near useless other than just being a minor slowdown to the game, but it's so RNG based that you can't even guarantee that it's going to slow down the game that much. And so I don't really feel like they buy you time to be stealthy. You've got other killers like Trapper and Plague who you've got to invest a lot of time up front to set up for later in the trial. And so they're able to snowball pretty well once you've set things up correctly. That said, with Pig, she's got no snowball ability really. And so all of that combined, I agree, she's not very strong. I just think she's a little stronger than D tier if you know how to play as her and you enjoy that play style. So I think C tier is very fitting. She's not strong. She's definitely on the weaker end, but I don't think she's quite D tier. And so yeah, I'll agree with 49% of you putting her in C tier. And so she can keep Freddy company. There you go. All right, so how strong is Clown? You all put him in C tier. So this is going to be another one of those places where I'm going to disagree with the community. I actually think he's B tier, in my opinion. I don't think a lot of people enjoy going against him because I get so many people to DC against me. And maybe that skews my perspective of how strong he is, because maybe I've just had some easier trials because people have DC'd early on in the trial. If you don't enjoy facing Clown, let me know down in the comments why, because I'm very curious, because I get so many people DC against me as playing as Clown. That said, I feel like he's got a really strong anti-loop ability, and he does take some technique to learn how to use. In fact, I'll be the first to admit I have no idea how to use his yellow bottles. I'm terrible with that. So if you have any tips for me, let me know those down in the comments as well. However, maybe what I might feel this way about Clown. I feel like he's a bit of an acquired taste in the game, and maybe some people just don't like him. I don't know, but I feel like he's stronger than C. But yeah, even just his anti-loop ability with the purple bottles, to me, bumps him up into B, at least. He's a solid, strong enough character, I feel. So I'm going to disagree with the community on this one, but again, it's not my tier list, it's y'all's tier list. So we will put him down in C tier. All right, now we're on to Spirit. And this one was actually a bit split, 54% in S tier and 42% in A tier. And I will agree with S tier as the overall ranking, in my opinion. I think she is very strong, and I'd actually be curious. Let me know down in the comments, if you voted on this one, or if you were to vote on this one, how would you vote, and do you play with a headset? And which side are you voting from? Because it's interesting to know, like, are you voting from the survivor perspective, or are you voting from the killer main perspective? Because I would be curious, if you are a killer main and you're playing with headphones, she's got to be S tier. But if you're not playing with headphones, I could see you putting her in A tier. That being said, I would be very curious, because I think with a strong set of headphones, she is very, very powerful. She's a character that you have to use the audio, and she relies on audio a lot. So if you don't, she loses a lot of her strength. And so I could see somebody saying, no, she's really A tier, but I think even post-nerf, she is still S tier. She's a very strong killer. She's just an audio-based killer. She's got great potential for mind games. In fact, the other night, I was able to pull off one of those, stand at the pallets and wait for them to vault back at you thinking you're phasing, and it just felt so good to pull that off. She's got such great mind game potential that I just think I agree with those of you who put her in S tier. I think she's got to be S tier. So again, 54% S tier. So that is where she will land for this tier list. S tier. There you go. All right, so on to Legion, and y'all put them in B tier pretty resoundly, actually. I was a bit surprised at this one, that 60% of you put them in B tier. I expected more C, to be honest, but I would agree with B. I think they're a B, but probably on the lower end of B, if I was to be honest. I think in general, they are pretty weak in the healing meta, unless they're running Thanatophobia, and then they obviously, that's a bit OP on them right now, in terms of dragging out the trial, even post-nerf. That said, overall, I don't think they're not too strong. They are good at creating when you can create chaos and just keep everybody injured and just keep going back and forth, it's a lot of fun, and they can be pretty strong in that way. But if you're not able to create that chaos, and in a healing meta, it becomes harder to do that because you frenzy on one and then you run over to frenzy on another, and that person just walks in a corner and starts healing. So they become much weaker because of that. And so I would put them on the bottom of B tier. And that's actually, to be honest, why I was surprised more people didn't put them in C tier. Yeah, but I think B tier is a good home for them in terms of strength. So B tier. B tier it is. All right, now we get to my favorite character in the whole game, Plague. A resounding 71% A tier. And I would agree with this. You might be surprised because she is my main. You might think that I would want to put her in S tier, but I actually 100% agree. She's A tier. Probably the top end of A tier, but that might be my bias, honestly. That said, I think she's very, very strong if you know how to play her. Her snowball potential is just tremendous. She's not easy, which may account for a lot of people putting her in B, 21% at least. She takes a lot of setup, a lot of strategy, a lot of thinking ahead, planning ahead, lots of management throughout the trial to make sure that you're able to snowball them properly. So she's not an easy killer because you've got to do a lot of simultaneous management of what's going on in the trial, which to begin with, a lot of people I've heard that don't like playing killer because they just have to manage stuff all over the place. She takes even more because you've got to be managing, okay, what am I infecting? What am I, tracking? And are they using the pools? Are they not using the pools? She's got a lot more to manage than the normal killer. And based on how survivors play too, can really determine how you're going to play as Plague. So she's a little bit trickier in that way. She takes a lot more strategy and a lot more learning of how to use her various nuances, if you will. And how strong she is can really depend on how survivors choose to play against her. For instance, if the entire team chooses not to cleanse, well, okay, then everybody's just exposed and a one hit down. If all the survivors choose to cleanse, then you become a very powerful ranged attacker. If half the team chooses to cleanse and half the team chooses not to cleanse, then you end up with a very OP ranged attacker. So that would bump her into S tier in my opinion, but that's situational, and we're not talking about situational. We're talking about just base level. How strong are the characters? So that being said, I agree with you all. I think her proper home is A tier in terms of how strong she is. And so there you go. But that's why I would put Hag down in B, because Hag is nowhere near as strong as Plague or Huntress, in my opinion. But again, that's my opinion. This is y'all's opinion, and I love hearing y'all's opinions. So anywho, let's move on, shall we? Next up, we have Ghostface with 61% at B, and I agree. I would say bottom of B. Nothing too strong, but nothing too weak. I think he can be used effectively, but also countered. So I think that sounds like a solid B tier character to me. So I will agree. Ghostface in B. A lot of B tier killers, which really, if you think about it, should be how the game is, because that means they're more balanced, right? That means that survivors have more of a chance, but they're not, it's not survivor favored. Having a lot of B tier characters, probably a very good thing. So there you go. All right, now we have the Demogorgon, and resoundingly 72% B. And I agree, absolutely. I think he is the most balanced character in the game. He's got a lot working for him. He's got mobility. He's got info gathering. He's got, you have to do some setup with the putting of the portals all over the place. He's got counterplay. I think he's a very balanced killer. And I saw a lot of agreement on that as well, that just he's probably the most balanced of all the characters in the game. So B tier is a very comfortable ranking, in my opinion, to put him in B tier with the rest. And I think he divides B tier right in the middle. He is solidly the most balanced in the game. All right, next up we have Oni with 78% A tier. And I would 100% agree with this. Although, to be fair, I think back in the day I would have said he was S tier, just because anytime I face an Oni, I just feel like giving up, to be honest. Not like really, but I just know I'm not getting out. I give up on the hope of escaping. It's more of like, okay, how long can I survive against an Oni? That's just because I'm not very good at facing Oni. So to me, he's S tier in terms of when I'm going against him, but I don't feel like he is actually S tier. I would agree with the community on this one. I think Oni is A tier. He's got a lot going for him. He's one of the stronger killers for sure, but not quite S. So yeah, there you go. I think he's a solid A tier. So next up we have Pyramid Head with a solid A tier ranking with 79% taking A tier. And I would agree with this one as well. I think that's spot on. He's able to cage survivors and get right back into the action, which is huge to save that time. He's a balanced ranged attacker. He can be very strong if you're good with him, but he takes skill to use. So it's not like too overpowered, because then everybody would play as him, but he takes some skill, some time to learn, some investment. And so I think that's good when you can invest time into a killer to learn how to play them and be able to use them very strongly in that case. But not everybody can just pick them up and be strong with them right out the gate. So I think he is very balanced in that way. He can trap and deny areas. He's got a lot going for him. He's a versatile character, so I think he's very strong. A tier is, I think you got it spot on. I think he's absolutely A tier. I agree. Okay. All right, so Deathslinger is another one that I am actually quite surprised by the rankings here, but I agree, 100%. 77% of you chose B tier. I actually would have expected it to be lower. I would have expected it to be C tier. That said, I do think if you hit your shots with him, he is very strong even after the nerf. I think you do have, it's very punishing if you don't hit your shots, but if you can hit your shots with him, he can be quite strong. Not too strong, but strong enough to be B tier, in my opinion. Now, if you miss your shots, he's just a slow M1 killer, but if you can hit your shots, he can be quite good. And so I think B tier is how I would rank Deathslinger, and I was actually quite pleasantly surprised to see that the community ranked him B tier as well. So let's put him in B tier. All right, so how strong is Blight? 85% of you put S tier, and again, I would agree with this one. He's got absolutely insane mobility, allowing him to just be everywhere and have a lot of map pressure. He's not easy, and he's tricky to learn, and so I think he's definitely S tier. I agree with the community on this one. Again, when I go and face off against a Blight, all I'm thinking is, how long can I last? Because he's very strong. If it's a good Blight, definitely S tier. Even if it's a decent Blight, S tier. So there you go. I think that's spot on. All right, so next up we have the twins with 48% A tier and 26% B tier. So this one was quite split, actually, all over the place. And I'm not too surprised by that. I would agree with A tier. I think they are quite strong. I think they're harder to rank probably because nobody ever plays them. So my guess is most of you probably don't play them very much, and most of you don't play against them very much. That would be my expectation. It does become a little harder to rank them, and I'll agree, I have a harder time making up my mind as well. But I personally think they are A tier. I would agree with the 48% of you that would put them in A tier. I think a good twins can devastate you. They can keep multiple survivors occupied at the same time. In my opinion, they are strong, not quite S tier strong, but A tier strong, I think, is a solid place to put them. So I'm gonna agree with you all there and put them in A tier for you. All right, now we have B tier for Trickster with 51%, 27% putting C actually. So if you were one of the 27% who voted C, or would you have voted if you had voted on this one, let me know. Do you just not like him? I'm just curious because I know a lot of people just don't like Trickster. And then there are those of you out there who really love Trickster. I think he's a solid B, personally. I think he's not quite A tier like Huntress in terms of a ranged attacker. However, I do think he's a very forgiving ranged attacker, where Huntress is a little more devastating as a ranged attacker. She also takes slightly more skill to use. I think Trickster is a bit more forgiving, and I think that bumps him into the B tier for me ahead of C tier. He's not much as insta-win as I think it sometimes can feel like playing against him. I would be curious, actually, those of you who ranked him higher, are you from the survivor perspective or the killer perspective? And those of you who ranked him lower, same question. Because I kind of feel like playing Trickster, he doesn't feel as strong as going against Trickster. I think a lot of that's just perception. It's certainly for me, it's not objective. It's a very subjective perception. But I did say I think he's a little more forgiving as a ranged attacker. If you're not good with him, you're still going to do better, in my opinion, than if you are playing as Huntress or Pyramid Head and you're not good with them and their ranged attacks, if that makes sense. I think his ranged attack is a lot more forgiving. So you can be okay with him and do okay, whereas if you're just okay with Huntress, you're probably not going to do as well. That said, he's not OP either, and I think he can be easily countered. So I feel B tier is a solid place to put him. And so along with the community, let's put him in B tier. All right, and now we get to my boy, the Nemesis. Huge Resident Evil fan, if you haven't picked up on that already. I think B tier, 64% of you said B tier. I think you're exactly right. I can understand why 26% of you put him in A tier, but I as much as I love Nemesis, I don't think he's A tier. I think he's B tier. I'm with those of you who put him in B tier. He's very good in chase, and he gets better as the trial goes on. He's probably one of the better killers in chase, actually. In terms of chase alone, probably A tier. But in terms of overall strength, I wouldn't put him A tier myself. I'd put him in B tier. I think he's a solid killer. I get danced around a lot as him, but I also destroy a lot with him. I think he's a solid character in general. I think his ranged attack is very balanced because it does require the extra hit. It's not super ranged, but it allows you to do things in chase, like hit over windows and stuff like that, hit over pallets, allows you to break pallets and get right back into chase. So I think he's very strong in chase. However, the rest of it isn't too overly strong. Zombies are a bit hit or miss. I use them mostly for information, just to track survivors. If I see a zombie off in the distance tracking it, going a direction that I know a survivor has run by recently, or I use them to level up my mutation rate. Other than that, they do set up some pretty funny moments sometimes when you can chase a survivor into them, but otherwise they're kind of useless. They're hit or miss. They're based on a lot of RNG, especially, when two of them spawn right next to each other in a corner of the map that no survivors are at because no generators are there. Like, come on, really? But all that to said, I think he's a solid anti-loop killer, but nothing too oppressive. So I think B tier is very, very fair for the Nemesis. And yeah, so y'all put him in B. So yeah, y'all put him in B, and I'm not mad about it at all because I agree. All right, next up we have Pinhead. A tier 40%, but overall B tier wins with 53%. Now I'm curious, let me know down in the comments, what did you vote and what do you play? What do you main, survivor or killer? Because I'm curious. I'm curious if survivors voted more the A tier and killer mains voted more the B tier, because he is one of those where I feel like going against him, he feels stronger than he actually is, in my opinion. His chains are annoying and punish slow, methodical play, which, if you think about it, is what a lot of new survivors do. They're not running all over the map all the time, generally. They're kind of creeping around, trying to be real stealthy, stay away from the killer, not get in chase, right? Whereas the more experienced survivors a lot of times are those who actually, want to get in chase because they find that to be the most fun part of the game. That said, he is very punishing to newer survivors, I think, because of those chains. However, I do think he has quite a bit of counterplay to his chains. His anti-loop is not amazing, and his lament configuration is helpful against weaker survivors, However, it always seems to be the really good survivor, the S tier survivor on their team is always the one to find it and solve it, right? I go over there and I find it's the person who just ran me for 2 generators. And I'm like, are you serious? Really? It had to be you. Of course it's you. And they always seem to be solving it when you've picked someone up, probably because they planned it that right? Because they're using the brain. That being said, the limit configuration is, it's hit or miss. A lot of his stuff I feel is hit or miss. I don't feel like he's an overly powerful killer, but I do feel he is stronger than C tier, of course. And so I would put him solidly with those of you, the 53% of you who put him in B tier. I think you're right. Right on the money on that one. So that being said, put him in B tier together. Alrighty. All right, the artist, 69% A tier. And I agree with this, but I would put her top end of A tier. She has info. She has range. She has a very strong anti-loot. She does have counterplay, but some of it requires a flashlight. So if you didn't bring one, then you lose a lot of your counterplay against her. I might even argue that she's S tier. And this is why. I am not very good with artist. I am not good with the artist, but I almost always do very well with her. And I think that's weird to me, because if I can be bad with a killer and do very well with them, that to me tells me it's a very strong killer. Now, like I said, I think I agree. I think she's A tier, top end of A tier. However, I might argue to move her up, but in general, I think you're right. I think she's A tier in terms of strength. And yeah, I'm comfortable agreeing. She's A tier. Yeah. All right, we're getting down to the last 2 now. So how strong is the Onryo? The Onryo? Is it the Onryo or Onryo? I can't remember. I don't have the game open. I'm not checking. The Onryo. C tier. I agree. 58% of you put her C tier. I'm surprised with 26% in D tier because I don't think she's that strong. I think she's a ton of fun. I love playing as the Onryo. I think she's very cool. I think she's a lot of fun to play. All her animations are just so good. That being said, she's weak. She's got no anti-loop. Her condemned almost never happens. She's got good mobility and map pressure by being able to go around to the different TVs. She's so small, she's stealthy, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword because then you can't see over stuff. And I don't know what it is. Does she not have the shortest lunge attack in the game? I miss so many M1 attacks with her. Buddy, this was maybe not the place to go. Oh, nice. I like the spin. Why did that not hit? Like, I literally, I'm so bad. Ah! There we go. We'll just pretend like that other stuff didn't happen, actually. It's confusing to me. I don't know if it's the animation or if she's actually, because she's so small, she actually has a shorter range. I don't know if I'm just making that up, but she feels like she does. Somebody let me know. Am I right on that? I don't know. But to me, she's a solid C tier in terms of strength. She's a ton of fun to play, but this isn't about who's the most fun to play. It's about who's the strongest. So I would agree with the 58% of you that put her in C tier. And I'd be curious, did you put her in B tier? Let me know. Why do you think she deserves to be in B tier? Because I'm really curious about that one. I disagree with it, but I could be convinced, I guess, maybe. So along with the community, we will put her in C tier. So our latest full release character before Wesker gets released is the Dredge. I was surprised with this one, 64% A tier. I personally don't think he's that strong. I think he's B tier. However, maybe upper end of B tier. You might be able to convince me of A tier. But I was a little bit surprised, 64%, like so many people chose him for A tier. That being said, I think he's strong, but I do think a bit of his strength and why I'd probably put him in B tier. I think a bit of his strength is that people don't know how to play against him yet. He's got a lot of mobility. In Nightfall, he can be pretty, pretty strong. So if you bring along the right, add-ons, he can be very strong in that way by causing Nightfall to happen a lot. There's just a lot of RNG in terms of locker spawns. And maybe how the locker spawn could determine whether he's A tier or B tier to me. I could see that. So I might be able to be convinced of A tier, but I would put him bottom of A tier at the highest because I don't think he's as strong as some of the people that we've already put in A tier. But 64% of you voted for him to go into A tier. So this is your community tier list. He goes in A tier. All right, so these are your rankings as to who are the strongest and weakest killers in the game. And then of course, some of my thoughts layered on top as well. Thank you to everybody who voted. We do have another set of polls for the next community tier list video up on my community tab, so go head over there and vote. As always, you've been awesome, stay awesome, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.